Net neutrality is really hot right now, and believe it or not, it also has multiple social and economical points of view. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Dramatic Impressions. Now, in case you didn't know, there was this little thing, it's called the internet or the World Wide Web. If you haven't, how are you watching this right now? Because that's incredible. So recently, and I mean, let's be honest, practically an annual thing, net neutrality has become a hot topic for the new FCC director, Ajit Pai. Now, I may butcher that name, I think that's how I pronounce it. Fingers crossed. For those that don't know what net neutrality is, it's when no matter what website someone has, an online store for bobbleheads or a streaming service like Netflix, everyone gets the same preference in terms of bandwidth, or speed in other words. Internet service provider companies like Comcast and Time Warner can't put priorities to some websites over another, but without net neutrality, people fear that the ISP companies could hold a website hostage unless they pay a premium. True, a majority of big-name companies like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, to name a few, have all lobbied against getting rid of net neutrality, since this would no doubt put a hefty cost in their running expenses. Companies like Comcast, at&t, Time Warner have all lobbied for getting rid of it. What's never heard is both sides of the argument. Now, no doubt a majority of people out there have heard about the nightmarish future with an unregulated internet. In the United States, that makes complete sense. Unlike practically all other developed nations, the US has a handful of companies that have an artificial monopoly on the internet. This has become possible by forcing smaller companies to close their doors through frivolous lawsuits or simply by buying them out. Now, in terms of the argument against net neutrality, this would allow a wider range of competition with other websites. This basically means that if, let's say, an online store doesn't need that much bandwidth for their customers to gain access to, they can pay less for slower speeds, while a website like YouTube can pay a premium for more speed so the playback of the videos will be smooth and clear for their viewers. Innovation and competition is stifled because one company can't simply pay more than another to get better speeds for their user base. Another reason is simply the lack of infrastructure. If person A only uses the internet to check who liked their latest tweets, while person B uses the internet for those sick no-scope 360s in Call of Duty, the ISP can't properly allocate the right amount of bandwidth per user. The argument for net neutrality, though, is almost a complete 180 and seems to stem from pure mistrust towards the ISP companies. The people on the for side seem to believe the opposite of thinking an unregulated internet will provide for businesses. There is some sense to this, since in this day and age, a majority of transactions are done with a credit card rather than through paper cash money. So all businesses rely on a neutral market to process transactions not only online, but also through brick and mortar shops. No one wants to wait 30 minutes to see if their card went through, just saying. And then there's the other aspect where sites like YouTube can easily have competition because new up-and-coming sites can't pay the big bucks to give their viewers faster, smoother streams. A neutral market would allow smaller sites to compete with the bigger ones. So, all in all, each side has their arguments that in all reality do bear some merit. Problem is, that's not reality. And we live in a capitalistic-centric world where the smaller companies tend to have a harder time competing with monopolies. In most cases, when the major ISP companies can't buy out the competition, they resort to legal action to stifle a smaller company's operations. When you take stories like Falcon Broadband in Colorado Springs, they were given multiple lawsuits by what is now Comcast, lawsuits that really had no grounds on. Things like tampering with their equipment, violating FCC regulations, unfair practices. Numerous lawsuits that most were either thrown out immediately or weren't pursued further. The point in the lawsuit was to have the smaller competition spend the hundreds of dollars an hour on lawyer fees. By spending the money on legal fees, this stifles competition and really any improvements. What really needs to change isn't getting rid of net neutrality, it's looking at what other developed countries around the world actually do. Now let's take Korea for example, the southern one, not the northern cousin of course. Korea has the fastest internet in the world at 10 gigs with infrastructure for 20 gigs being built right now. Besides throwing a truckload of money at achieving this, they also mandated that internet lines be shared amongst other ISPs. This allows competition to flourish because the low funds needed to build a startup compared to the millions needed in the US. This resulted in almost 100% of the population having internet because they were able to shop around for cheaper prices for what they wanted. Korea saw the future and importance of internet years ago. They saw its ability to be used in not only education, but also for the economy. Now, for the sake of taking multiple examples, you can even look at banks around the world that chose to focus more on banking through the web versus brick and mortar stores. Just like how ATMs lowered operating costs, multiple banks ended up getting a sharp increase in clients, but also in their profits. If Wall Street making more money isn't proof enough that the internet is great, then I don't know what is. All in all, in a perfect world, net neutrality isn't needed because everything is run fairly and competition creates innovation. Sadly, that's not the case in the US, and until investment in infrastructure and the political and legal atmosphere changes with the FCC's inability to keep bigger companies in check, the US will keep falling further and further behind. So now that doom and gloom is done with, let me know what you guys think. I'm actually curious to know more stories about up-and-coming ISPs being stifled. Shoot, point me to a better fiber I can subscribe to. That'd be outstanding. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.